stories make up a big part of our lives. In any single moment, we are likely thinking about something we've heard, something we believe, or something we've read, or some imaginary reality we've made up. So ever since we've been here, we've been moving through stories. For writers, this becomes something more purposeful. We move into it, navigating a craft that we've taken on. And so that's one of the things that I've wanted to highlight with the Ackee Pod, interviews with writers. So this episode, we are taking a look into that vision. And next week, Monday, you'll hear from another writer as we continue our interview series. But for this episode, we're jumping into the background of the Ackee Pod and finding out where this whole thing came from. So I'm Yashika Graham, welcoming you to another episode of the Ackee Pod, interviews with writers. I'm drinking some ginger tea, ginger with lime. I really like lime in my tea. So this episode, as we've said, we're getting into the background. Now, you might hear the name Ackee. For Jamaicans and many Caribbean countries, Ackee is a very familiar name. It is a fruit. It is Jamaica's national fruit. And it is also a component of our national dish, which is Ackee and Saltfish. Now, a confession right off the bat, I do not eat Ackee and Saltfish. I'm vegan, so that means I enjoy Ackee. I think it's one of the most amazing dishes, but I have it on its own. So I cook Ackee, I steam it down with seasoning and everything like that. And I have it that way, right? So it is part of the national dish. It is a fruit, and it also has a kind of mysterious quality to it, or a quality that you might say is haunting, if you will. So we also know growing up that while we eat Ackee, that it is poisonous. A lot of us would have been told by our parents not to trouble the Ackee if it's not open. It exists in a pod, and when it's ripe, the pod opens and reveals the seeds, reveals the fruit. And you are not supposed to trouble it if it is not showing the seeds, showing the fruit, because it means that it's not quite ready. And we also hear that in the periods of drought, that it is not recommended to eat Ackee because some of the toxins that exist in the fruit are not dispelled during that period, or they're intensified. Now I'm gonna tell you a little bit about that, the toxicity, because that's significant. That's significant to my whole navigation of the Ackee Pod. Right, so the Jamaica Information Service says that the word Ackee is derived from the original name Ankye, which comes from the Twi language of Ghana. I hope I'm getting that pronunciation right. Ankye, Ankye. So, as I've mentioned, Ackee has this long reputation of being poisonous and potentially fatal, and we've seen that in Jamaica quite a bit. We've seen persons suffer from poison. Although Ackee has a long-running reputation of being poisonous, the fruit of it, which is the cream part of it that the seed is attached to, is very well known, has a long-running reputation as well for being just this delicious part of our cuisine, right? And it is cooked both in Jamaica and in various other Caribbean countries. Now, it is the national fruit, as I've mentioned, and is considered a delicacy. It was imported to Jamaica in 1773, it is said, and is a prominent part of the cuisine, right? The unripened fruit and the unedible portions of the fruit contains hypoglycin toxins, including hypoglycin A and hypoglycin B, known as soapberry toxins. Hypoglycin A is found in both the seeds and the arils, which is the fruit, while hypoglycin B is found only in the seeds. Minimal quantities of the toxin are found in the ripe fruit or arils. In the unripe fruit, depending on the season and exposure to sun, the concentrations may be up to 10 to 100 times greater. So that warning we would have gotten as children to not trouble the ackee if sun hot is rooted in this, the actual science that says the toxins are intensified in the fruit, in the seeds, in dry season, right? So in 2011, it was found that as the fruit ripens, the seeds act as a sink whereby the hypoglycin A in the fruit convert to hypoglycin B in the seeds. In other words, the seeds help in detoxifying the fruit and bring the concentration of hypoglycin A to a level which is generally safe for consumption. So in that way, the seeds tend to be more intensely concentrated with that toxin than the actual fruit. And the more it ripens, the more that shift happens where the toxins in the fruit transfer to the seeds, right? So it becomes important. The ripening becomes something important. So I just gave you that background to kind of get into what naming this program, the Ackee Pod, means to me, and what that broad vision is in the work that we are doing here. So in my understanding, the work of writers can very often be a difficult undertaking. Writers do not live in isolation from the world. There's a romantic idea that writers do, but writers exist in the world and must survive, must navigate the world as everyone else does. But the writer also chooses to tell stories and chooses to have those moments of looking in, looking deeper, looking wide. And my understanding of that is very much like what we see happening with the Ackee. I mean, for Jamaican people, I mean, it tells you something about Jamaicans, right? That we would take something that is poisonous and take it and turn it into national dish, national fruit. I mean, what? So it tells you something about people who would do that. I mean, when we talk about people who have vision, people who have a sense of a fierce kind of nature, you know, and to see something possible within the seemingly impossible, and to kind of live on the edge, you know, like there is a thin line, one would understand, a thin line between that, the fatality of that poison, and it being a nutritious dish that you enjoy with your family. I mean, that takes some time to process. So in that way, I am seeing how we navigate that fruit, we put it to prominence, and I also see how writers take what is at times challenging material, what is at times a challenging, difficult life, and make worlds out of it. And for many writers, even the act of speaking, if we can take it from there, the act of speaking is dangerous. The act of telling is dangerous. We're often told as children that you don't say everything. You don't say everything. And so writers conduct a kind of daring work when they take on that act of spilling the beans, as it were, of challenging the silences that are around us. We've had many writers talk about how difficult it is to exist in the spaces that they live in and to tell the stories of that space. We think about Maya Angelou and her speaking about silence and what silence did to her, what the dangers in her life did to her in terms of stopped her from speaking for many years and then moving back into speaking and telling stories, right? And about how dangerous that felt. Kai Miller's essay collection a few years ago, The Things I Have Withheld, speak prominently, just even that title speaks prominently about the fact of having been a teller for so very long, and yet there are still things that are not said. Buju Banton talks about the full has never been told. And I do believe that writers continue to tell because there is so much more to uncover and so much more to turn around, as it were, and to see again, as if we are revisiting rooms that we have existed in before, and we are seeing different things, perhaps seeing from different angles. There are those writers who exist in very physically dangerous spaces in times of war. They're not able to tell the stories of their space without explicit physical danger possibly coming to them. So many writers are in exile, right? And for this very purpose. So the act of writing brings with it not just the toil of sitting down, and we know that that can be quite the toil. Sitting down and writing, it also brings with it, what do you call on yourself when you decide to tell a story? And I think that there is a degree of bravery in that work, in deciding to say, right? And so I want to put those things in the same kind of conversation with the idea of a set of people who are eating poison, basically, who are finding nourishment and finding value in something that could be dangerous for your lives, for the lives of your family, but that there is something there. There is nourishment there. There is beauty. There is value, and there is something that grows even while you go back to those rooms, I want to say. So that is the long way, the long way of getting into what the Ackee Pod, interviews with writers, emerged out of, that navigation of life, which can potentially be difficult, which can potentially be dangerous, which is a non-isolated experience of you write, you choose to write, but you also have to survive. You also have to survive having written, having exposed the stories that you're exposing, and you also have to survive and keep a roof over your head as a writer, right? And so I am interested very much in how writers do that, and interested in knowing the kinds of stories that people are telling. I was at Calabash some years ago, this amazing on the cliffside in St. Elizabeth, and Calabash Literary Festival. And it was the year that Salman Rushdie was a guest. And I remember sitting there at the back of the tents because the place was so packed. There was no space under the tents. I was sitting at the back and I had my notebook there, and I'm like, I'm not missing anything. And he said, and I wrote this down, he said, in good writing, a story about a single place can become about the world. And a story about the world can become about a single place. And he was talking really about how when you zoom into a place, when you zoom into the specificity of a location, someone far away is able to see themselves in that specificity, to locate themselves there. Even if them don't eat ackee, they can see themselves in the fruit of their own space because of those details, because of the beauty that you are navigating, the pains that you're navigating, and how concrete those things are. And that has always stayed with me and becomes significant now that I'm thinking about the stories that exist across the world and how inside the Ackee Pod now, the variousness of stories, the variousness of locations is becoming important. So one of the things that is emerging out of this space is a kind of global voice. So wanting to tell the stories and hear the stories being told from people around the world. So last year, 2023, I had the amazing privilege of being awarded a fellowship in the University of Iowa's International Writing Program. Big up University of Iowa. And going there, I knew that I would have been in community with over 30 writers. 34 of us would have been there. And I had this vision of interviewing writers, just very curious about unlocking and getting into the minds of writers. And I thought, geez, I've been having this idea for so very long, and I've been writing the amount of notes me write about this series like for years now. And I thought, okay, I'm going to this place. I have time to write. I have space. I have community. I should interview these writers. And being in that space, being around all the writers has just given me so much perspective and invited me to jump into this territory that I've been kind of just looking at kind of from a distance. And so that international sense of traveling, going to places through the work of writers is very significant to this series. So broad vision, one day, I'm just going to say, one day I'll be traveling to interview people. I'll just say, okay, I'm going to go to Nigeria and I'm going to be interviewing this writer and this writer, and just that will be something, that's going to be, I'm going to go to Canada next week, and then we're in the UK for 2 months and this, that, right? Yes. So I'm going to that's the broad vision. For right now, though, there is something very significant in hearing the stories of people from where they come from and getting that perspective, getting a sense of the language and the language use. So that is something that I'm foregrounding and wanting to foreground, keep in the front of our minds. This season, we are 6 episodes in now, and we have heard from writers from Nigeria. We heard from Sunes Nathaniel, who is a poet and broadcaster, journalist from Nigeria. From South Africa, we heard from Busisiwe Mahlangu, who is a poet and a playwright. We also heard from Cameroonian screenwriter, filmmaker, Enna John Scott. Yes. And we also have conversation with Aishan Hutchinson, who is a poet and a professor. And his latest collection was nominated for the T.S. Eliot Prize. We also had, he's based in the US, Jamaican based in the US, Humroy White, who is based in the UK, also Jamaican, a poet, a playwright, a multi-dimensional artist, really, musician, visual artist, all of that. And we also heard from Wang Yi, who comes to us from Hong Kong, who is a librettist and a fiction writer. So we had quite the variety in the writers so far that we've heard from, coming from different parts of the world, dealing in different genres, and able to give us perspective on the work that they do, on the space that they have to write from. And in my vision, this is useful for writers just to get perspective and community. I joked that when I was in Iowa that, you know, it's kind of a joke, not completely, but part of the value of being in Iowa was to have community with people who are in the same struggle as I was. And so that is part of it, to create a space where writers can, you know, hear the various stories, not just the stories being put out, but also the backgrounds of those stories when writers come to the Ackee Pod, right? And coming up, we have a few more episodes for this first season, and some of the places we're gonna be hearing from, we have a writer from Finland, we have a writer from Poland, we have another writer from Nigeria, we have a writer from Suriname and the Netherlands, we have a writer from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and we have a writer from Finland. I hope that's it. I think there's 6 more episodes for this season. Yeah, so I'm very excited to be bringing this to you. It is far more work than I anticipated. Let me drink some of my ginger tea. It's far more work than I anticipated, to be very honest with you. But I am so excited to have it be happening, finally. I love the running up and down and shooting and conducting the interviews, and I hope that it is of value to those who are watching. I do want to say thanks to those of you who have been so supportive, subscribing. I think we're close to 50 subscribers now, which from 0 to me is a humongous deal. So thank you so very much for your support. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for engaging with the Ackee podcast. Go ahead and look for Wild Current Studios at Wild Current Studios on Instagram, and you may find our channel on YouTube, and you can watch all our updates, check out our updates. Leave a comment if you are so moved, and just continue to support. I'm really thrilled to be engaging with the world in this way, and to be able to have conversation with writers around the world, and to invite further conversation around writing and perhaps further work, because that is one of the things I think writers reveal through the fiction, through the poetry. They reveal possibility. And I think when you talk to writers, there is also an invitation into other worlds as well. And I so very much appreciate that is possible. A little bit about me. I am Yashika Graham. I am a poet and a radio broadcaster based in Jamaica. And I started Wild Current Studios a few years ago, a space where I teach writing workshops, I do creative consultancy, and the Ackee Pod, or the Ackee Podcast, is one project coming out of Wild Current Studios that I have been working on for a while now, and that has finally come to public view. And I do want to say thanks to the University of Iowa, the International Writing Program based at the University of Iowa. I want to say thanks to the U.S. Embassy Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs for their support and for facilitating my participation in the International Writing Program. Big thanks to all our writers who allowed me to take them from whatever they were doing, the important work they were doing while on the program, to be able to get a bit into the work that they do. And as we continue, I'm excited to hear where we'll be going in terms of physical space, what insight we'll get from whatever part of the world, from each part of the world, and where we'll be going in terms of what we'll be discovering, right? So consider this a space for discovery and for investigation, as it were. This has been another episode of the Ackee Pod, Interviews with Writers. I'm Yashika Graham, inviting you to join us for a brand new episode Monday, and we're going to be telling you who is featured. Check out our social media pages and our YouTube channel at Wild Current Studios to find out who is our next guest and where we'll be going for that episode. I'm Yashika Graham for the Ackee Pod. Catch you next time.